The diplomatic vessel Astronova glided silently through the star-speckled void, its sleek hull reflecting distant starlight as it approached the designated neutral coordinates. Inside, Elena Reyes stood before the full-length mirror in her quarters, smoothing down the perfectly pressed uniform that represented humanity's best hopes for peaceful relations with the Thalorian Alliance. "Breathe," she whispered to herself, watching her reflection's chest rise and fall with deliberate control. As the ship's communications officer and designated cultural liaison, the weight of interstellar diplomacy rested uncomfortably on her shoulders. The year 2375 had already witnessed 3 failed attempts at establishing formal relations between Earth's coalition and the notoriously private Thalorian species. Elena had been specifically chosen for this mission due to her extensive background in xenolinguistics and cultural anthropology, but theoretical knowledge only stretched so far when facing actual aliens. The soft chime of her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, turning away from the mirror. Commodore Malik, the Astronova's commanding officer, entered with the straight-backed posture of someone who had spent decades in service. His dark eyes quickly assessed Elena's appearance and seemed satisfied with what they found. "Officer Reyes, the Thalorian delegation has docked. Their representatives will be joining us in the Grand Hall in 30 minutes. His voice was steady, but Elena detected the underlying tension. "I don't need to emphasize how crucial this meeting is." "No, sir," Elena replied. "The briefings were quite thorough." Malik's expression softened slightly. "The briefings can only prepare you so much. Remember, the Thalorians value authenticity above all else. Their empathic abilities make deception impossible, so don't even try to mask your emotions, just keep them appropriate." "Yes, sir. I've been practicing the greeting rituals and studied their social hierarchies extensively." "Good." Malik hesitated, then added, "You've reviewed the file on their cultural liaison as well. I believe her name is Neris," Elena supplied quickly. "Yes, I've memorized everything available, though our intelligence on individual Thalorians is limited." "Very limited," Malik agreed. "This Neris will be your primary contact. Establishing a productive relationship with her could make all the difference." He checked his timepiece. 27 minutes, Officer Reyes. I suggest you finish your preparations." After Malik departed, Elena returned to the mirror this time, studying not her uniform, but her expression. The Thalorians could sense emotional states, that much the briefings had made clear, but the nuances of their empathic abilities remained mysterious. Could they detect nervousness, uncertainty? Would they interpret such emotions as signs of dishonesty? Taking a final deep breath, she made her way toward the Grand Hall, mentally rehearsing appropriate conversation topics and cultural pleasantries. The corridor's sleek walls curved gently designed to accommodate various alien physiologies while maintaining Earth aesthetics. As she walked, other crew members nodded respectfully, all aware of her role in today's proceedings. The Grand Hall itself had been transformed for the occasion. Holographic star maps adorned the ceiling, displaying both Earth's territory and the Thalorian systems in equal prominence. Tables arranged in a circular pattern featured both human delicacies and what xenobiologists believed would appeal to Thalorian tastes. The symbolic importance was obvious: equal footing, mutual respect, shared resources. Elena took her position near the main entrance, just as the first chime announced the approaching delegation. The doors slid open with ceremonial slowness, revealing the Thalorians in all their alien elegance. They entered as a group of 7, moving with fluid grace that immediately set them apart from humans. Their skin ranged from pale blue to deep indigo, with delicate ridge patterns etched across their exposed necks and temples. Most striking were their eyes, large, luminous, and completely lacking pupils, instead filled with something akin to swirling silver mist. They wore robes of material that seemed to shimmer between states of matter, neither fully solid nor liquid. At their head walked an imposing figure that Elena immediately identified as Ambassador Vex, the Thalorian representative, whose stern demeanor had become infamous during previous negotiation attempts. His facial ridges were more pronounced than the others, etched with what appeared to be ceremonial scarification that glowed faintly in the hall's light. But it was the figure to his right that captured Elena's attention completely. Slightly shorter than the others, with skin the color of Earth's twilight sky, and neck ridges that rippled subtly, with each movement she could only be Neris, the cultural liaison assigned to work directly with Elena. Unlike the others whose expressions remained stoically neutral, Neris's large eyes darted curiously around the room, betraying what Elena interpreted as a mixture of apprehension and interest. Commodore Malik stepped forward, performing the traditional human greeting of a shallow bow, followed by open palms. Ambassador Vex honored representatives of the Thalorian Alliance. Welcome aboard the Astronova. We are privileged to host this historic meeting. Ambassador Vex inclined his head minutely, then raised his right hand to touch the ridges on his neck, the Thalorian equivalent of formal acknowledgement. Commodore Malik of Earth, your hospitality is noted. His voice carried a musical quality that the universal translators couldn't quite smooth out. Allow me to present my delegation. As Vex introduced each member, advisors, security personnel, scientific experts, Elena maintained proper diplomatic posture while studying Neris from the corner of her eye. The Thalorian woman seemed to be doing the same to her, their gazes occasionally meeting in brief moments of mutual assessment. And finally, Vex concluded, our cultural liaison, Neris and Valori, who will facilitate understanding between our peoples. Neris stepped forward with a grace that made Elena suddenly aware of her own comparative awkwardness. The Thalorian performed a more elaborate neck gesture that, according to Elena's studies, indicated both respect and openness to communication. Communications Officer Elena Reyes. Malik introduced our specialist in cross-cultural relations and your designated liaison for the duration of these negotiations. This was her moment. Elena stepped forward carefully, executing the neck gesture she had practiced countless times in private. Neris and Valori, I am honored to serve as your counterpart. May our collaboration bridge the void between our worlds. The formal greeting complete the delegation dispersed into the predetermined mingling pattern that diplomatic protocol demanded. Elena found herself guiding Neris toward the refreshment tables, acutely conscious of maintaining appropriate conversational distance, not too close to violate Thalorian personal space, not too far to suggest discomfort or disrespect. This is your first interspecies diplomatic assignment, Neris stated, rather than asked, her voice carrying the same musical quality as Ambassador Vex's, though softer, more melodic. Elena blinked in surprise. Yes, though I've had extensive training. Is it that obvious? A ripple passed through the ridges on Neris's neck. What Elena's briefing suggested was the equivalent of a subtle smile. Your emotional signature is earnest. More experienced diplomats learn to project a certain detachment. I see, Elena replied, unsure whether this observation was criticism or merely commentary. And have you served as liaison before? Twice, Neris confirmed, accepting a crystal flute of blue liquid from a passing server drone. Though never with humans. Your species has a reputation for being emotionally complex. Elena smiled, relaxing slightly at the hint of curiosity in Neris's tone. That's a diplomatic way of putting it. Most species find us confusing or contradictory, I believe. Indeed. Neris tilted her head, the movement causing light to play across her facial ridges in hypnotic patterns. Your capacity to experience opposing emotions simultaneously is unusual among sentient beings. The conversation flowed more easily than Elena had anticipated, covering preliminary topics like environmental preferences aboard the ship and basic comparative cultural elements. Neris proved to be more forthcoming than the briefings had led Elena to expect, asking thoughtful questions about human social structures and offering measured insights into Thalorian society in return. As they conversed, Elena noticed Ambassador Vex watching them from across the hall, his expression unreadable, but his attention unmistakable. When she mentioned this observation to Neris, the Thalorian's neck ridges stiffened momentarily. The ambassador is traditionally minded, Neris explained carefully. He believes in maintaining cultural distinction, rather than seeking similarities. That sounds like a challenging position for a diplomat, Elena ventured. Perhaps. But not all diplomatic missions aim for integration. Sometimes establishing clear boundaries is equally valuable. The subtle warning in Neris's words wasn't lost on Elena. Despite their seemingly productive conversation, fundamental differences remained, and presuming otherwise would be dangerous naivety. As the reception progressed, various dignitaries from both sides approached their liaisons, creating opportunities for wider interaction. Elena observed the careful dance of power and influence, noting which Thalorians deferred to whom, which topics caused subtle tension in their neck ridges, which humans failed to notice Thalorian cues of discomfort or interest. 2 hours into the reception, Elena judged that sufficient rapport had been established to risk a more personal exchange. Drawing from her cultural training, she decided to offer Neris a compliment, a strategy that, while potentially hazardous across species, could significantly accelerate mutual understanding if done properly. Waiting for a moment when they stood relatively isolated from others, Elena turned to Neris and carefully pronounced what she believed was a polite acknowledgement of Thalorian beauty standards. "The luminous patterns along your neck ridges shimmer like melting moonlight," she said, proud of having memorized the intricate phrase from the linguistic database. The effect was immediate and disastrous. Neris, who had just taken a sip of her drink, made a choking sound as the blue liquid sprayed from her mouth. Her normally pale blue skin flushed a deep violet starting at her neck ridges and spreading rapidly across her face. Her eyes widened to an alarming degree, and she stumbled backward, colliding with a server drone that toppled, sending glasses crashing to the floor. The sudden commotion drew all eyes in the hall. Ambassador Vex moved with surprising speed to Neris's side, supporting her, as she continued to cough violently. His gaze, when it turned to Elena, contained none of the diplomatic restraint from earlier, only cold fury. "What have you done?" he demanded, his voice carrying easily across the now silent hall. Elena stood frozen, her mind racing to understand where she had gone wrong. I only offered a compliment on the—" Silence. Vex cut her off with a sharp gesture. "You dare to speak such words in a formal gathering, to a representative of the Thalorian High Council?" Commodore Malik appeared at Elena's side, his expression grave. "Ambassador, there seems to be a misunderstanding. Officer Reyes is our most knowledgeable cultural specialist. Whatever offense has occurred was surely unintentional." "Ignorance does not excuse violation," Vex replied coldly, still supporting Neris, whose color had begun to normalize, though she continued to avoid looking directly at Elena. "Your officer has just publicly proposed the most intimate form of neural bonding to my cultural liaison, equivalent to what humans might consider an explicit sexual proposition, but far more invasive." Elena felt the blood drain from her face as the implications became clear. The phrase she had memorized, believed to be a formal compliment about physical appearance, was apparently something entirely different and catastrophically inappropriate. "Ambassador, I assure you," she began, but Vex raised his hand again. "This reception is concluded," he announced. "The Thalorian delegation will return to our vessel to consider whether continuing negotiations is possible after such a fundamental breach of protocol." With that, the Thalorians began moving toward the exit, forming a protective formation around Neris, who still appeared visibly shaken. As they reached the doors, Ambassador Vex turned back. "Commodore Malik, you will receive our decision within 6 Earth hours. I suggest you use that time to better educate your diplomatic personnel, or replace them entirely." The doors closed behind the delegation, leaving a stunned silence in the Grand Hall. All eyes turned to Elena, who stood rooted to the spot, mortification washing over her in waves. Her first major diplomatic assignment, and she had managed to insult or proposition her counterpart within hours of meeting her. "My office," Malik said quietly. "Now." The debriefing that followed was excruciating. Elena explained her research, the linguistic database entry that had described the phrase as a formal compliment, appropriate for diplomatic settings. Malik listened grimly occasionally, consulting with the ship's xenolinguistic specialists via holographic conference. The database entry isn't incorrect exactly, the lead linguist finally concluded. But it's catastrophically incomplete. That phrase would indeed be a compliment between married Thalorians, or those formally engaged to be married. In any other context, especially from an outsider, it's tantamount to proposing the most intimate form of Thalorian connection. Why wasn't this clarified in the briefing materials? Malik demanded. Because the previous diplomatic missions never progressed to a stage where such personal expressions would be relevant, the linguist admitted. Our knowledge of Thalorian social norms is still fragmentary at best. Elena sat with her head in her hands. I've ruined everything. Malik's expression softened slightly. Not necessarily. The fact that they've given us a time frame for their decision, rather than simply departing, suggests they're at least considering continuing the negotiations. Ambassador Vex wanted to leave immediately, a new voice interjected. Elena looked up to see the holographic image of Security Chief Torres, who had been monitoring the Thalorian communications as a standard precaution. We intercepted internal communications from their ship, Torres continued. There appears to be disagreement among their delegation. Ambassador Vex advocated for immediate withdrawal, but several others, including this Neris, argued for a more measured response. Neris defended us, Elena asked, surprise momentarily, overshadowing her embarrassment. Not exactly, Torres clarified. She argued that cultural misunderstandings were inevitable, and that the incident demonstrated the need for more extensive exchange, rather than less. She specifically cited your earlier conversations as evidence of genuine human interest in understanding Thalorian culture. A faint hope kindled in Elena's chest. Perhaps all was not lost after all. There's more, Torres added, her expression turning grave. The Thalorian High Council has been monitoring the situation closely. They've dispatched a Jarnak diplomatic vessel that will arrive within 12 hours. Malik swore under his breath. The Jarnaks. Why would they involve a third party? The Jarnaks serve as arbiters in Thalorian diplomatic disputes, the xenolinguistic specialist explained. They're a warrior culture with strict honor codes allied with the Thalorians for centuries. What does this mean for our negotiations? Elena asked. It means, Malik said heavily, that this has escalated beyond a simple cultural misunderstanding. The Jarnaks will likely impose some form of ritual challenge or test to determine whether negotiations can proceed. What kind of test? Impossible to predict. The Jarnaks customize their challenges based on the nature of the offense and the species involved. He fixed Elena with a stern gaze. But one thing is certain: as the one who caused this situation, you will be the one who must face whatever challenge they set. The next 6 hours were the longest of Elena's life. She alternated between reviewing every scrap of information available on Thalorian and Jarnak cultural practices, and pacing her quarters in anxious anticipation. The ship hummed with tension, crew members giving her sympathetic glances in the corridors, while whispering among themselves when they thought she couldn't hear. When the communication finally came, it wasn't what anyone had expected. They want to continue negotiations, Malik announced, entering Elena's quarters without ceremony. But there are conditions. Elena rose from her desk, heart pounding. What conditions? The Thalorian delegation will return tomorrow, accompanied by Jarnak representatives. Before formal negotiations can resume, you must complete what they call a courage challenge, a test designed by the Jarnaks to prove your worth and sincerity. What does this challenge entail? They haven't specified. Apparently, revealing the nature of the test in advance would defeat its purpose. Malik's expression was grim. You have the right to refuse, Elena. No one would blame you. The use of her first name, rather than her title, underscored the seriousness of the situation. Elena straightened her shoulders. With respect, sir, that's not an option. If there's any chance to salvage these negotiations, I have to take it. Malik nodded, not looking surprised. I expected you'd say that. Get some rest then. Tomorrow we'll test you in ways we can't predict. After he left, Elena tried to follow his advice, but sleep proved elusive. Her mind kept returning to the moment everything had gone wrong. The look of shock on Neris's face, the violent flush of color along her neck, ridges the chaos that had followed. But beneath her mortification was a growing curiosity. Neris had argued for continuing contact, despite the apparent severity of Elena's faux pas. Why? The answer might well determine the future of human-Thalorian relations. Morning arrived too quickly, and not soon enough. Elena dressed with meticulous care, ensuring every aspect of her appearance conveyed respect and contrition. The grand hall had been reconfigured overnight, the celebratory decorations replaced by a more austere arrangement, suitable for serious negotiation or judgment. When the doors opened this time, the Thalorian delegation entered with even greater formality than before. They were accompanied by 3 new figures, whose appearance immediately marked them as Jarnaks, tall, powerfully built humanoids with exoskeletal armor that seemed to grow directly from their bronze-colored skin. Their eyes were compound like those of earth insects, and they moved with the precise economy of trained warriors. Ambassador Vex performed the minimal greeting gesture toward Commodore Malik. As agreed, we return to continue our discussion pending the outcome of the Courage Challenge. The central Jarnak stepped forward, towering over everyone present. I am General Krazak of the Jarnak Arbitration Corps. The nature of the offense requires a test of both sincerity and capability. His voice was surprisingly soft for his imposing stature, but carried absolute authority. Communications Officer Elena Reyes stepped forward. Elena moved to the center of the hall, conscious of all eyes upon her. She performed a respectful neck gesture toward the Thalorians, then a formal bow to the Jarnak General. I accept whatever challenge you deem appropriate, General Krazak. My only request is that you judge me alone for my mistake, not humanity as a whole. The General's compound eyes gleamed. Nobility in accepting responsibility. That is noted. He gestured to one of his companions, who activated a holographic projector from his wrist guard. Above them, an image materialized, a swirling mass of energy, violent and chaotic, surrounding what appeared to be a small spacecraft. Your challenge is to navigate a simulation of the Kalnari plasma storm, Krazak announced. A natural phenomenon that occurs at the boundary between our territories. You will pilot a virtual vessel through conditions that have claimed the lives of many experienced pilots. This will demonstrate both your skill and your commitment to crossing the boundaries between our peoples. Elena swallowed hard. She was a communications officer, not a pilot. While basic flight training was standard for all officers navigating plasma storms, was far beyond her expertise. The simulation will be conducted in the training deck, Krazak continued. It will begin in 1 hour. You may bring one advisor to assist with preparation only. Once the simulation begins, you must navigate alone. As the delegates began moving toward the training deck, Elena felt a light touch on her arm, so unexpected that she started. Turning, she found herself face to face with Neris, whose expression was difficult to read, but whose neck ridges pulsed with what might have been concern. You should know, Neris said quietly, that no human has successfully navigated the Kalnari simulation before. Have many tried? Elena asked. 3 during previous negotiation attempts. Neris glanced toward Ambassador Vex, who was engaged in conversation with the Jarnaks. None completed the course, though. All survived the simulation. I see, Elena said, her heart sinking. Thank you for the warning. Neris hesitated, then added, the key to the Kalnari isn't just technical skill. It's understanding the pattern beneath the chaos. Before Elena could ask what she meant, Neris had moved away to rejoin her delegation. With only an hour to prepare, Elena recruited the ship's best pilot, Lieutenant Commander Jimenez, as her advisor. They sequestered themselves in a small briefing room adjacent to the training deck, reviewing what little data Earth had on plasma storm navigation. The fundamental problem, Jimenez explained, manipulating the holographic display to show energy flow patterns, is that plasma storms don't behave according to normal physical laws. The energy currents shift unpredictably, creating vortices that can tear a ship apart in seconds. But Neris said something about patterns beneath the chaos, Elena mused. What could that mean? Jimenez frowned. There are theories that plasma storms follow higher-order mathematical principles, patterns too complex for human perception in real time. Some of the best pilots claim they can feel these patterns, but, he shrugged. I've always considered that mystical nonsense. The Thalorians and Jarnax clearly don't think it's nonsense if they use it as a test, Elena pointed out. True enough. Their neural structures are different from ours, the Thalorians especially, with those ridge organs that sense energy fluctuations. Jimenez gave her a sympathetic look. I can teach you the technical basics in the time we have, but honestly, this test may be designed for you to fail. Elena thought of Neris's warning, the knowledge that other humans had attempted this challenge and failed. Or it's designed to teach me something I need to understand. The hour passed too quickly. Basic maneuvers, emergency protocols for energy surges, the theoretical principles of plasma dynamics. Jimenez crammed as much instruction into the limited time as possible. But both knew it was woefully inadequate preparation. When a Jarnac officer arrived to escort her to the training deck, Jimenez gave her shoulder a supportive squeeze. Remember, the simulation can't actually kill you, no matter how real it feels. If you get overwhelmed, focus on survival, rather than completion. The training deck had been transformed by Jarnac technology. What had once been an open space for physical exercise and combat training was now dominated by a complex apparatus part, cockpit simulator, part neural interface chamber. The delegates from both species lined the walls preparing to observe her performance. General Krazak stood beside the apparatus. This device will create a fully immersive simulation connected directly to your sensory processing centers. You will experience all sensations as if they were real, though no physical harm will come to you. He paused. However, the neural stress can be significant. There is no dishonor in forfeiting if the strain becomes too great. Elena approached the simulator eyes, moving automatically to where Neris stood with the Thalorian delegation. The cultural liaison's expression remained neutral, but Elena thought she detected a subtle ripple of encouragement in her neck ridges. I'm ready, Elena stated more confidently than she felt. The simulator enclosed her like a cocoon, interfaces connecting to her temples and along her spine. The physical world faded away, replaced by the interior of a small spacecraft, simple controls viewports showing star-scattered space. Everything felt eerily real, from the subtle vibration of the ship's engines to the cool metal of the control panel beneath her fingertips. Bah! Simulation commencing. Krazak's voice announced from nowhere and everywhere. Your objective is to navigate through the storm to the marker on the far side. Beginning in 3, 2, 1. The peaceful starfield before her suddenly erupted into chaos, swirling masses of energy in violent shades of purple, green, and white. The ship shuddered as the first tendrils of plasma lashed against its shields. Warning indicators flashed across the control panel as Elena gripped the navigation controls. Drawing on Jimenez's hasty instructions, she attempted to steer a course through what appeared to be a less dense section of the storm. For a few moments the strategy seemed to work, the ship responding to her commands, pushing deeper into the roiling energy field, with shields holding steady. Then everything went wrong. A massive surge of plasma struck from below, sending the ship spinning wildly. Alarms blared as shield strength dropped precipitously. Elena fought to regain control, her hands moving across the interface with increasing desperation as the craft tumbled through the chaotic storm. Structural integrity at 60%, an automated voice reported dispassionately. Shield failure imminent. Elena's training took over, pushing aside panic in favor of methodical problem-solving. She diverted power from non-essential systems to reinforce the shield's used short thruster bursts, to stabilize the spin, and scanned desperately for any pathway through the surrounding maelstrom. But the storm seemed alive, malevolent. Each time she found what looked like a clearer route, the plasma would shift, blocking her path, with even more violent energy patterns. After 15 minutes of struggle, she had made frustratingly little progress, while her ship's condition deteriorated steadily. Structural integrity at 40%, the computer informed her. Recommend immediate withdrawal from plasma field. Sweat beaded on Elena's forehead as she fought against both the ship's controls and her own mounting frustration. This wasn't working. Technical skill alone clearly wasn't enough to navigate this impossibility. The key isn't just technical skill, it's understanding the pattern beneath the chaos. Neris's words echoed in her mind. What pattern? All she could see was random violence, unpredictable energy surges that defied conventional navigation. Unless Elena forced herself to stop fighting the controls, letting the ship drift momentarily while she studied the swirling plasma with new eyes. Instead of focusing on individual energy surges, she tried to perceive the overall flow, the way the entire storm system moved and breathed as a unified entity. Gradually, impossibly, a pattern began to emerge, not in the visual field, but in the rhythm of the ship's vibrations, the fluctuations of the shield harmonics, the subtle changes in the ambient energy readings. The storm wasn't random. It pulsed with its own internal logic, a multi-dimensional dance of energy that followed rules beyond conventional physics. Acting on instinct now, rather than training, Elena adjusted her approach. Instead of trying to find safe passages through the storm, she began to move with it, allowing the ship to be carried by certain energy currents, using minimal thruster adjustments to harmonize with the plasma's natural flow, rather than opposing it. The change was immediate and dramatic. The violent shaking subsided, shield drain slowed significantly, and the ship began making steady progress through the heart of the storm. On the navigational display, the exit marker grew steadily closer. Then came the final test, a massive vortex blocking the only path forward, spinning with such violence that even her new approach seemed inadequate. Elena studied it, sensing that simply waiting for it to disperse wasn't an option. The simulation was testing something specific here. Understanding dawned. The vortex's core, seemingly the most dangerous point, actually rotated with perfect mathematical precision. If she timed it exactly right, Elena accelerated directly toward the center of the vortex, ignoring the computer's strident warnings. For a heart-stopping moment, the ship was engulfed in blinding energy systems flickering on the edge of failure. Then suddenly, they were through, emerging from the storm into clear space, the exit marker directly ahead. Simulation complete, Krazak's voice announced as the virtual environment dissolved around Elena. Challenge successful. Returning to physical reality was disorienting. Elena blinked against the training deck's lights, her body remembering stress it hadn't actually experienced. As the simulator released her, she nearly stumbled, catching herself against the edge of the apparatus. The observers remained silent as General Krazak approached. His compound eyes studied her with enigmatic intensity. "You adapted," he stated simply. "When technical knowledge proved insufficient, you discovered another way. This is the essence of the courage challenge, not merely survival, but transformation of understanding." Elena wasn't entirely sure what to say. "Thank you, General. The experience was illuminating." "Indeed." Krazak turned to address the assembled delegates. "The challenge has been met successfully. By our traditions, negotiations may proceed." He inclined his head toward Ambassador Vex. "Unless the Thalorian delegation has further objections." Vex's expression remained inscrutable, his gaze moving between Elena and Neris. "The challenge results are acknowledged," he said finally. "Preparations for formal negotiation may continue." As the delegates began to disperse, discussing the next steps in the diplomatic process, Elena found herself approached once again by Neris. The Thalorian's neck ridges rippled with what Elena now recognized as approval. "You understood," Neris said softly. "Few outsiders ever do." "I'm not sure I understood completely," Elena admitted. "But I began to sense that fighting against the storm was never going to work." "A lesson that applies beyond plasma navigation," Neris observed, with what might have been the Thalorian equivalent of a meaningful look. Before Elena could respond, Ambassador Vex called Neris away, leaving Elena to wonder exactly what had just transpired between them. The day that followed was consumed by diplomatic preparations, arranging the formal negotiation chamber, reviewing proposed treaty points, establishing communication protocols that would minimize potential cultural misunderstandings. The Zarnak representatives remained aboard as observers, their presence a constant reminder of how close the mission had come to failure. It was late in the ship's night cycle when Elena, unable to sleep after the day's intensity, made her way to the observation deck. The vast, transparent dome offered an unobstructed view of the surrounding space. The stars, the distant nebula that marked the border between territories, and the graceful form of the Thalorian diplomatic vessel, maintaining position alongside the Astronova. She didn't immediately notice she wasn't alone. Only when a movement caught her peripheral vision did she realize Neris stood near the far curve of the dome, similarly absorbed in the stellar view. "I apologize," Elena said quickly, preparing to withdraw. "I didn't mean to intrude on your solitude." "There is no intrusion," Neris replied, turning to face her. In the starlight, the Thalorian's features took on an ethereal quality, neck ridges faintly luminescent. This observation chamber was specifically mentioned in today's cultural exchange notes as a shared space for reflection. Elena moved closer, maintaining what she hoped was a respectful distance. "It's a good place to think. Something about the perspective it offers." "Indeed. Your people and mine share an appreciation for the contemplative aspect of space travel. It is a promising commonality." They stood in silence for a moment, side by side before the cosmic panorama. Elena found herself studying Neris's profile surreptitiously, noting the delicate patterns etched into her facial ridges, the way starlight reflected in her pupilless eyes. "I owe you an apology," Elena finally said, "for my inappropriate comment during our first meeting. It was inexcusable cultural ignorance." Neris turned to face her directly. "Yet you have already made amends through the challenge. By our customs, the matter is resolved." "Even so, I wanted to express my personal regret, especially since I've learned you argued against breaking off negotiations entirely." A ripple of surprise passed through Neris's neck ridges. "You were aware of our internal discussions?" Elena winced internally at her slip. "General ship security," she explained vaguely. "Standard procedure for diplomatic missions includes monitoring communications." "I see." Neris didn't seem particularly troubled by this revelation. "Then you know I believed your proposition was unintentional, though I admit the experience was quite shocking in the moment." "I can imagine," Elena said, then reconsidered. "Actually, no, I probably can't imagine exactly how it felt. Our cultural briefings were woefully inadequate about the significance of that particular phrase. Perhaps that is because its significance is difficult to translate into human terms." Neris moved closer, her voice dropping slightly. "What you said about my neck ridges shimmering like melting moonlight is a traditional declaration of intent to form a neural empathic bond. Among my people, such bonds are the deepest possible connection, far more intimate than what humans consider marriage." Elena felt her cheeks warm with renewed embarrassment. "I had no idea. The database listed it simply as a formal compliment. In certain contexts between certain individuals, it is precisely that. But those contexts are defined by pre-existing relationships and formal arrangements." A pause, then. "However, your use of it, while inappropriate in timing and setting, was linguistically perfect. Few humans have mastered the tonal subtleties of our language so completely." Was that a compliment? Elena wasn't entirely sure but decided to take it as such. Thank you. Languages have always been a passion of mine, not just the words themselves, but the cultural frameworks they represent. An admirable perspective, Neris turned back to the starfield. Perhaps that is why you succeeded in the courage challenge, where others failed. You were able to perceive beyond your cultural limitations. With some help, Elena acknowledged. Your hint about patterns beneath chaos was crucial. I merely stated a fundamental truth. You applied it successfully. Another ripple moved through Neris's neck ridges, something Elena was beginning to interpret as a sign of emotional emphasis. It is rare for non-Thalorians to grasp our perspective so readily. The conversation shifted to more neutral topics, the differences between human and Thalorian educational systems, the challenges of space travel for their respective physiologies, the artistic traditions that had evolved in their separate cultures. As they talked, Elena felt a growing sense of connection that transcended mere diplomatic courtesy. When ship's morning eventually arrived, and they reluctantly parted ways to prepare for the day's formal negotiations, Elena found herself looking forward to seeing Neris again, with an enthusiasm that went beyond professional duty. The negotiations themselves proceeded better than anyone had dared hope. With the courage challenge successfully completed, the Thalorian delegation showed unexpected willingness to engage on substantive issues, territorial boundaries, trade protocols, scientific exchange, even preliminary discussions of mutual defense arrangements. Throughout the sessions, Elena found her gaze repeatedly drawn to Neris, who served as translator and cultural interpreter for the more technical discussions. The Thalorian woman seemed equally aware of her, their eyes meeting across the chamber, in moments of shared understanding or appreciation, when particularly difficult points were successfully navigated. 3 days into the formal talks, however, everything changed again. The Thalorian delegation arrived for the morning session with unusually somber demeanor. Ambassador Vex requested a private meeting with Commodore Malik and Elena before proceedings could continue. In the small conference room adjacent to the negotiation chamber, Vex activated a personal privacy field that would prevent any recording or observation of their conversation. A situation has developed that requires immediate attention, he announced without preamble. The heart speech ritual has been activated. Malik glanced at Elena, who shook her head slightly. This term hadn't appeared in any of their briefing materials. I'm afraid we're not familiar with this ritual, Ambassador, Malik admitted. Vex's expression tightened. It is not typically discussed with outsiders. However, circumstances necessitate transparency. He fixed his gaze on Elena. When you spoke the bonding words to Liaison Neris, regardless of your ignorance of their significance, you initiated a traditional process within Thalorian culture. That process has continued to advance despite the irregular circumstances of its beginning. I don't understand, Elena said, alarm growing. What process? Among our people, when bonding words are spoken, a period of assessment follows. The Courage Challenge served as the first evaluation, a test of adaptability and understanding that you completed successfully. According to our most ancient traditions, this automatically triggers the second phase, the heart speech ritual. Malik leaned forward, concern evident. What exactly does this ritual entail, Ambassador? In essence, it requires Officer Reyes to declare her true intentions toward Liaison Neris before the assembled High Council representatives. If those intentions are deemed sincere and honorable, negotiations may continue. If not, he left the consequence unstated. Elena felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. But I had no intentions whatsoever when I spoke those words. It was a complete misunderstanding. That is understood, Vex acknowledged. However, the ritual has been formally invoked by the High Council observers aboard our vessel. It cannot be dismissed without severe diplomatic consequences, potentially including an immediate end to all negotiation efforts between our peoples. This is outrageous, Malik protested. You're forcing Officer Reyes into a false position based on a cultural misunderstanding that has already been addressed through your courage challenge. I am not forcing anything, Commodore Vex replied, with evident distaste. I personally argued against invoking the ritual precisely because of the circumstances. However, I was overruled. Traditional elements within our council believe that Officer Reyes's success in the Courage Challenge suggests a deeper compatibility that must be explored through the full traditional process. And what happens during this heart speech ritual? Elena asked, struggling to maintain professional composure. You will stand before the council and liaison Neris. You will speak from your heart regarding your respect for Thalorian culture, your impressions of Neris herself, and your intentions regarding future interactions. The council will evaluate your emotional resonance for sincerity. Vex's tone softened marginally. It is not my place to advise you, Officer Reyes, but I will say this: absolute honesty is essential. Our empathic abilities will detect any attempt at diplomatic falsification. After Vex departed to allow them time for consideration, Malik paced the small conference room with barely contained frustration. This is a manipulation, he declared. They're using a cultural tradition to force you into an impossible position. Whatever you say will either be deemed insufficient, giving them reason to withdraw, or will commit you to some form of personal relationship that goes far beyond your diplomatic duties. Elena sat quietly processing the implications. I'm not sure that's accurate, sir. From everything we've learned about Thalorian culture, traditions like this aren't arbitrary. They serve specific social functions. What function could this possibly serve except embarrassment? Clarity, Elena suggested. Think about it, the Thalorians value emotional honesty above all else. This ritual forces both parties to acknowledge their true feelings, removing ambiguity. Malik stopped pacing to study her. You sound almost like you're considering going through with it. Do we have another choice if refusing means the end of negotiations? We could protest to the Zharnak observers. As arbiters, they might intervene. Elena shook her head. That would only confirm the traditionalists' suspicions that humans aren't capable of the emotional directness they value. Besides, she added almost to herself, maybe there's value in absolute honesty at this point. Malik's expression softened with concern. Elena, I need to ask, have you developed personal feelings for Liaison Neris that might be affecting your judgment? The question caught her off guard, mostly because she hadn't fully examined her own emotions until that moment. The connection she felt with Neris, was it merely diplomatic rapport or something more? The late-night conversation in the observation deck, the shared glances during negotiations, the sense of understanding that transcended language and culture. I respect her, Elena said carefully. I admire her intelligence and her willingness to bridge our cultural differences. Whether that constitutes personal feelings in the sense you're asking, she shrugged. I'm not sure I can answer that objectively. Malik sighed. That's what I was afraid of. Just remember that whatever you decide to say in this ritual, you're representing humanity's interests first and foremost. Don't commit to anything you or we can't follow through on. The heart speech ritual was scheduled for that evening in what the Thalorians called a neutral emotional space, a chamber aboard the Zharnak vessel that would serve as impartial ground for the proceedings. Elena spent the intervening hours in meditation and preparation, trying to clarify her own thoughts and feelings. What did she truly think of Neris beyond diplomatic necessity, beyond cultural curiosity? What genuine connection had formed between them? And how much of that could she honestly express without misrepresenting herself or humanity's broader interests? When the appointed time arrived, Elena wore her formal dress uniform, but deliberately removed the communication devices and recording equipment that typically accompanied diplomatic functions. This was to be a moment of personal truth, not official record. The Zharnak chamber was unlike anything she had experienced before, a circular space, with walls that seemed to absorb sound and light in equal measure, creating an atmosphere of intimate isolation, despite the number of individuals present. The Thalorian Council representatives sat in a semicircle with Ambassador Vex at their center. The Zharnik observers stood at the perimeter, statuesque and silent. And directly across from where Elena was positioned, stood Neris, her expression unreadable, but her neck ridges pulsing with what might have been nervous energy. General Krazak stepped forward to formally open the proceedings. The heart speech ritual is an ancient tradition among the Thalorian people, dating back to their earliest recorded history. It serves to establish truth between individuals when uncertainty exists. As neutral arbiters, we Zharnaks witness this ritual with respect for its significance. He turned to Elena. Human Officer Elena Reyes, you may approach the center and begin when ready. Elena moved to the designated position, feeling the weight of numerous gazes upon her. The chamber's unique properties created the sensation that she and Neris were somehow alone, despite the audience surrounding them. Taking a deep breath, Elena began to speak, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I stand before you without artifice or diplomatic calculation. When I spoke the bonding words to Liaison Neris during our first meeting, I did so in ignorance of their true meaning. That much is established fact. However, in the days since that misunderstanding, something unexpected has occurred. She paused, gathering her thoughts, aware of the subtle shifts in posture among the council members as they assessed her emotional resonance. I have come to deeply respect Neris Navalori, not merely as a representative of her people, but as an individual of extraordinary perception and grace. Our conversations have revealed a compatibility of thought that transcends our different origins. Her guidance during the Courage Challenge demonstrated a generosity of spirit that I find admirable and moving. Elena turned slightly to address Neris directly, now meeting those silver-misted eyes with unwavering directness. I cannot pretend to fully understand the neural empathic bond that my accidental words referenced. Human connections are formed differently through time, through shared experience, through gradual discovery of another's mind and heart. Yet I find myself genuinely interested in continuing to discover yours, Neris, in whatever form that exploration might appropriately take. A ripple of reaction passed through the Thalorian Council members, as Neris's neck ridges flushed with color. Not the deep violet of embarrassment from their first encounter, but a softer rose hue that Elena hadn't observed before. If asked to define my intentions, Elena continued, I can only offer honesty. I intend to remain open to the connection that has begun to form between us, to learn from it, to nurture it if circumstances allow. I do not know where such a path might lead, but I am willing to walk it with sincerity and respect for both your traditions and my own. She fell silent, then having said all that truth demanded. For a long moment, the chamber remained utterly still, the council members communicating among themselves through subtle ridge patterns that Elena couldn't interpret. Finally, Ambassador Vex rose from his seat. The council has evaluated your heart speech, Officer Reyes. Before judgment is rendered, tradition requires that Liaison Neris respond with equal honesty. Neris stepped forward, her movements fluid, yet somehow conveying tension. When she spoke, her musical voice carried new emotional depth that the universal translators couldn't quite capture. When you spoke the bonding words, Elena Reyes, my reaction was one of shock, not merely because of protocol violation, but because no one had ever directed such words toward me before, in any context. Her ridge patterns shifted, expressing complex emotions beyond verbal description. In the days that followed, I found myself drawn to your presence in ways that confused and intrigued me. Your success in the Courage Challenge revealed a mind capable of transcending its own cultural limitations, a quality rare among any species. She moved closer now, standing directly before Elena, close enough that the faint luminescence of her ridge patterns cast subtle patterns of light across Elena's face. I cannot speak of neural empathic bonding with you, for such connections require physiological compatibilities that our different species may not share. But I can speak of understanding, of mutual discovery of paths walk together rather than apart. Her voice softened. These things I would welcome with sincerity equal to your own. The chamber remained silent for several heartbeats after Neris finished speaking. Then, with ceremonial precision, Ambassador Vex approached them both. The council recognizes the truth of heart speech between Elena Reyes and Neris and Valori. By ancient tradition, their words bind not only themselves, but their peoples in mutual respect and cooperation. He performed an elaborate neck gesture that Elena had never seen before. The final ritual component requires physical acknowledgement of spoken truth. For a moment, Elena wasn't sure what this meant. Then Neris extended her hand palm upward, in a gesture so human-like that it momentarily startled her. Understanding dawned as Elena placed her own hand atop Neris's, their fingers interlacing. A surprising warmth spread from the point of contact, not merely physical heat, but something more profound, as though some essence of Neris's consciousness briefly touched her own. From the widening of Neris's eyes, Elena suspected the sensation was mutual and equally unexpected. "The heart-speech ritual is complete," Vex announced. "Negotiations between our peoples may proceed with the blessing of the High Council." As the formal proceedings concluded, and the assembled representatives began to disperse, Elena and Neris remained connected, neither quite willing to withdraw from the unexpected intimacy of the moment. "I think," Neris said quietly, "that something unprecedented has just occurred." Elena smiled, feeling a sense of possibility that transcended diplomatic considerations. "Unprecedented seems to be becoming our specialty." The negotiations that followed over the next week progressed with remarkable smoothness. The treaty that eventually emerged established not only basic diplomatic relations between humanity and the Thalorians, but laid groundwork for scientific cooperation, cultural exchange programs, and even preliminary military coordination in areas of mutual concern. Throughout the process, Elena and Neris worked closely together, their growing personal understanding enhancing their professional effectiveness. The connection that had formed between them, neither fully human nor fully Thalorian in nature, became something of a symbol for the larger diplomatic achievement, a bridge between fundamentally different ways of perceiving the universe. On the final day, as the treaty was formally signed by representatives of both sides, with the Zharniks serving as witnesses, Elena found herself standing beside Neris in the observation deck, where their personal relationship had first begun to deepen. "I never imagined," Elena admitted watching, as the three vessels prepared to depart for their respective territories, "that my worst diplomatic blunder would lead to the most successful negotiation of my career." Neris's neck ridges rippled with amusement. "Perhaps it was not a blunder, but a necessary catalyst. Some bridges cannot be built through careful planning alone. They require unexpected leaps." "What happens now?" Elena asked the question, encompassing both large-scale diplomatic developments and their personal connection. "The treaty establishes an exchange program for diplomatic personnel," Neris replied. "I have volunteered to serve as the first Thalorian cultural attaché aboard an Earth vessel." Elena turned to her in surprise. "The Astronova! If that assignment would be acceptable to you." "More than acceptable," Elena said, feeling a surge of happiness that she made no attempt to conceal, knowing Neris would sense it regardless. "Though I should warn you, human cultural integration can be challenging." "I anticipate many challenges." Neris acknowledged her own emotional signature radiating contentment. "And many discoveries." As they stood together, watching the stars, their hands found each other once again, the subtle connection between them strengthening with each passing moment, a living embodiment of the broader bridge their peoples had begun to build, all because of words spoken in ignorance but fulfilled in understanding. The diplomatic vessel Astronova adjusted its course, preparing for the journey home. But for Elena Reyes and Neris and Valori, the most important journey was just beginning.